Hello, it's Speak It Thursday, and it's your girl Shuli, and I am back with another episode of Speak It. And take my deep breath like I do before we get into it. Tonight is no different. We are here to have conversations to inspire change. We have two conversation starters in the house, and it makes me feel special because May is Better Hearing and Speech Month. I have two speech pathologists, very esteemed speech pathologists, and let's talk about who they are before we jump in. We have Dr. Dionna Latimer-Hearn, and she is a speech pathologist who graduated from Northwestern University. She completed her Master of Arts degree in speech language pathology at George Washington University. Oh my gosh, she's the founder of Respect Dialect. So we're going to put some respect on our dialect. We're going to talk about AAVE, which is African American Vernacular English, or AAE to some, African American English. Some people call it ebonics. Some people call it the mother tongue. So she's here to help us talk about it. Dr. Latimer-Hearn is the education director of the REACT initiative. It's a Christian nonprofit advocating for equity in education. And she's going to help us speak it tonight. And we have a friend. They're both my new friends. They don't know it yet, but we have Dr. Megan-Brette Hamilton. She's a communication specialist, a researcher, and a leading voice on cultural-linguistic humility, responsiveness, and competence. She is an assistant professor at Auburn University, and of course, she's a speech pathologist, like I said, and she's a podcaster also. She has the podcast Honeybee Connection, where she celebrates all of the cultural ways that language and culture influence the way we communicate and provide tips and insight into how we can better communicate with each other. So you all know what to do. When I bring them on, give them some Speak It love as you're coming in and taking your virtual seats. Make sure you share. And as they come up, give us some likes, give us some hearts, say hello, say good evening. Hi, ladies.
Hello.
Hi.
Welcome, 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 welcome. And we have some people coming in. And when you come in, drop your city. Let's get ready to speak it tonight, but let us know where you're tuning in from. But how y'all doing? That's what we're doing tonight. We're sisters.
Right.
We're talking about language. Do we say well or good? That's the other. I'm starting off.
It's good.
Depends on the setting. But let's just jump right into this conversation. What is code switching anyway?
Uh-oh. Oh, you're going to look at me like that? Okay.
Okay.
I knew you were going to try it.
I could do it. I could start because I think, I don't think there is a definitive agreed upon definition on what code switching is. I'm going to be honest. I think we can understand it in a very connotative way, a very practiced way, like what it looks like when we practice it. But as far as the definitions go, it depends upon the discipline. It depends upon who's saying it. It started in a very, linguistic realm. Bilingualism is where kind of code switching really started back in like the 1940s and 50s. They were doing research with Mexican Americans and how they code switch from Spanish to English. But I think for the purposes of us tonight, I think we're really talking about the different ways we use communication patterns that are accessible to us, our own individual, depending on context. And context is varied. Setting, person, place, time.
Something to pull your move and add to what you have said.
Please do.
Megan-Brette. But no, I think that code switching is a controversial topic. And I know that when we talk about it, there's a lot that arises. I think people argue about it a lot. I think people are unsure about it. I think that it depends not on your race, not on whether or not you speak another dialect, but on just your understanding of the linguistic concepts behind it. Is really what determines whether or not you support it or you're against it or where you kind of fall in that. And I think that there are a lot of opinionated people who speak up on it, but don't really understand the linguistic background of it.
Ooh, so when the people are speaking up on it, what is it that they really need to know, and what's problematic about not fully understanding it but speaking up on it?
I would say, one, differentiating between shifting registers and shifting the code. And that's a big problem. So I think that everyone assumes that everybody code switches because we speak differently in one context with this person, and then we speak differently with another person. So the way I speak to a child is different than the way I might speak to my boss. And people assume that that's code switching, but that's really shifting their register. So I'm speaking relatively informally with a child. I don't have to change the code at all. And then I speak more professionally with the boss, or more formally with the boss. That does not, I don't have to change the way in which I'm communicating. I simply have to change the mannerisms with it and the formality of it, but not the code itself. The same code can be used across both.
Okay, what's the code? Go ahead.
I'm sorry. Well, no, I was going to say, I want to add to that too, because I think, I get that all the time. Like when we have our, talks, and we're usually talking to a room full of white women because they're SLPs and teachers. And I remember I've had quite a few people say like, well, don't we all code switch? Don't we all do it? Don't we? And, the inevitable interview scenario comes up, right? Well, for an interview, you should code switch. Well, definitely for an interview. And a metaphor I like to give, analogy, whatever. An example I like to give to people, I'll say is, okay, so look, let's say for an interview for a certain job, and this is all dependent, almost all of us will do something neat with our hair, whatever that is. Maybe you'll go put it back. Maybe you'll put it in a bun. Maybe you'll put it down. Maybe you'll curl it. Maybe you do something. You'll do that. But for me, asking someone to code switch, especially someone who's Black, is kind of like asking them to straighten their hair if it's naturally curly. It's an identity thing. It's an identity piece. It's a cultural piece. So something I wish people understood about it is that it's not just grammar, subject verb agreement. It's not just morphosyntax. It's not just adding an S, using past tense this way. It's not just that. It's not so linguistic. It's an identity.
Whole
it's
identity.
Cultural.
It's shifting the whole identity and having to fit into a box that America says is required of us. And I don't think that that's appropriate all the time. I think that we should be able to maintain our identity and still be successful, still navigate the world, still do what we do on a day-to-day basis.
And what does that look like? Because I feel like there is a divide even within our community, keeping it real versus code switching, or as they might say in the hood or back home or something, talking white. You trying to talk white. What you doing? You talk like a white girl. How is that a divide? Can we jump into that? I feel like we can't have this conversation for the culture and about the culture without talking about that. Is that based on what you just said? Is that why?
Okay, I just want to say this first because Dionna, actually, we've had this conversation before on a previous podcast. And I think something else people need to understand within the Black community, within all communities, is, okay, there are like 10 different ways to be Black, right? And I'm one of those ways. And I was a person who grew up speaking mainstream American English, general American English, whatever you want to call it. Everybody calls it something different. And so I was one of those Black people who said, you talk white. And so for me, it's interesting because when I do code switch, my first dialect is mainstream American English. And then, but that's why people still want people to understand how much of an identity it is. Just the way you speak is part of your identity. Because when people tell me I talk white, that hits at my identity. I'm Black. I am Black. I'm blackity black, as people say, right? Mm-hmm. But this was the environment that I grew up in. This was the neighborhood I was raised in. This is the classes that I was in. And so that is part of still my identity, and I think sometimes people think when the way we talk about it, code switching, it's AAE to the privileged dialect, right? AAE to that, or the stigmatized dialect to the privileged one. And I'm like, yeah, but there's also something of me, like I went to Hampton University, right? So that's where I really gained a lot of my AAE. I mean, my whole family speaks AAE, but I wasn't raised in my family. They lived in South Carolina. I was raised in Maryland. And so I learned to do that so that I could feel like I fit in with some of my Black people. And it wasn't conscious. I didn't do it purposely. I just was immersed in it so much. So I think that's something else people need to understand. It's not like all Black people speak AAE And that's not true at all. There's like 10 different ways to be Black.
I don't think there's a million different ways to be Black. I think
Million.
I think we need to just get away from this idea of that we're a monolith, and our identity is, a piece of that is the culture and the way we talk and our, our proximity to certain communities or to whatever experiences we might have had. Those all shape us just like they shape everyone else. But I think that from the outside looking in, a lot of people want to paint us with just one brush. This is how Black is, this is what it means to be Black. And that includes some of our own in our own community. This is what you do if you're going to be Black. And I think you can be all kinds of Black, and I think you can also switch it up like we're talking about today. You can code switch to a degree if you choose to do that. I run into a problem with it when we're forcing people to do something like that. I don't think that it's okay for me to decide for another person how their identity should play out and how they should express that and how they should engage with whomever they might be in a conversation with. That's not my responsibility, and that's not even my right. That's their right to decide that. But by and large, we're doing that in the schools, especially. But we're forcing people to sort of, I guess, assimilate is no better word than that. We're forcing them to assimilate in order to meet with success. So the more I assimilate to white mainstream culture, then the better I'll do in school.
Well, when we had our conversation, our offline conversation, I admitted, and I can talk about it because anybody who's kept up with me throughout the years, I mean, that was my campaign. I thought I was helping the people by teaching them how to say certain words, what words are not words, and policing in a way. And we police grammar, we police in all of these ways. And then I had a shift, and travel did that for me, a shift in just my spiritual mindset, just who I am as a person. And it made me start looking at that, and it just started to feel really judgy. I don't really talk about it as much. And I've been trying to figure out, how do you shift? So what's the conversation that we need to have if we're talking about reframing this? So within the culture, before we can even talk about how to advocate for children, but yeah, within the culture, how are we reframing this?
I don't know. I'm going to go to my group, respect the dialect. Like, it's a very basic thing. Like, just hit it. I mean, respect it. I think that if we're running into people who speak other dialects that are considered less stigmatized, we don't try to change that. We're not going to run into a person who speaks a British dialect and say, oh, you sound uneducated and this is horrible. And they may actually be speaking the low prestige dialect of their area, but we're still looking at it like, this is so beautiful and whatever, right? But we don't do that because they come from a place that is associated with this whiteness and this power and whatnot. And so we think that that's great. We uphold that. But then you have a person who speaks British influenced English, maybe from an African nation. And suddenly we need to change that. So what are we actually saying? I mean, and we're not really trying to change that British dialect. We're trying to change the Blackness that person has. We're trying to change the way that they present because we don't feel that's acceptable.
And, as we said offline, it's exactly what Dionna's saying. We have gone to this point where we use language as a proxy for discrimination, right? We are discriminating against all the things that we're legally not supposed to be discriminating against, right? And ethically, we shouldn't be discriminating against. It's race, it's ethnicity, it's geographic location, it's socioeconomic status, it's educational level. We are discriminating against all of that because all of that is correlated and tied to encoded. Yeah, it's just that's how it works. That's how you learn to speak, right? And so I think one of the things I try to get people to understand too, even when it comes to like the research world, isn't the goal of this effective communication?
Yes.
Why is the goal that I say a word the way you think I'm supposed to say a word? Like the way I always tell my students, I'm like, whether you say salmon or salmon, you meant the pink fish, I will go get that for you. Why does it need to be corrected to a way that you think is right? Like I always talk about with British English too. I'm like, okay, they say schedule. So I'm going to go over there and correct them and say, actually, the SCH says sk. In your linguistic pattern, in your linguistic system, yes, that is what SCH says. But in our linguistic system, SCH is sh. It's just a different linguistic system and their rules. And I think if people could understand too, the way that these children, let's talk with our AE speaking children, the way these children are speaking, it's rule governed. They have control. Unless, okay, we're speech language pathologists. Unless you have difficulties with understanding and acquiring language in general, speech, articulation, voice, whatever our areas are, then by the time kids are about 5 years old, universally, you have control of a grammatical system of some sort. And we have to understand that. And the fact that your system is deemed less, that's the problem. That's what we have to figure out, because you have the grasp of a system. It's just, it might be a different system.
No, that's true. Yeah. Let's go ahead. Do you want to say something?
I was going to say, we always want to dismiss it as this like random, like, I don't know, barrage of just errors. And it's not. I mean, it's so obvious. I'm like, so all the people who speak AAE, which is largely African-American in our country, of course. So all the Black people have failed to learn English in the exact same way. Like, that doesn't even make sense, but that's what we're saying. Like, that's what people will argue, that it's broken English, it's bad grammar. It's, well, how is it that everybody is doing the same exact thing? And there's a pattern to it, and there are rules to it, and there are ways you can do it incorrectly. Because that happens too. Oh, there are fakers out there, our posers.
Saturday night.
Yeah, our posers are doing that. Yeah.
So with that said, is it a disorder or a dialect or a language?
Oh dear God, it's not a disorder in any way, shape, or form. You can have a communication disorder because, okay, here's the thing. Every single one of us speaks a dialect. Every single mainstream American English, however you want to word it, just don't say standard. I don't like standard. Any way you word it, everyone speaks a dialect of a language. Right now, Dionna and I talked about this earlier. There are people who are going to define language differently than dialect, define dialect differently than language. There's all of that. I know that too. I like to do another analogy is I think of language as ice cream and dialect as the flavors. And no one dialect is better than another, but they are dialects. Somehow in America, we have missed what a dialect actually is, right? Like we've all traveled, right? I've been to 6 continents and I lived in New York, meaning all the countries of the taxi cab drivers that I was in, right? And almost everyone was like, oh, well, I speak the Northern dialect of fill in the country. Oh, I speak the Southern dialect of fill in the country. We say dialect and automatically it's this lowering of the way of your communication style. But I'm like,
and your cognitive ability, but your cognitive ability and all these other assumptions come in with it, and it has nothing to do with that. But we'll readily say, well, a person is less intelligent because of this, or
Isn't that something? Systemic racism.
It'll get you every time.
In ways that you're not even thinking. And I'm just like, oh, how in the world? Because as woke as we want to be, and you think about how we're moving forward in society today, right? 2020 was just a vision correction for so many people. I feel like there are those who knew what was going on, those, the people who were in denial, and those people who will forever be in denial, well, pretend that they're in denial. They know. But I mean, it just elevated how, I don't even know the word, insidious that this thing is. It's just so, I mean, from how we deal with healthcare disparities, we knew that. We know how deep it goes now. We know how subtle it can be from just everything. We already knew about the police brutality. We knew about this, but then language, the assault and oppression using language, is just kind of like, it's where we are. I just felt like I needed to throw my little 2 cents in, but how do you know though? What do we do as speech pathologists who are in the schools, or I work with adults, but how do you handle this? How do you approach this? We know that it's not a disorder, it's a dialect, but then what do you do for the parent who wants their child to speak like Michelle Obama, or to use mainstream American English? What do you tell them? Because they are just feeling like this is what's going to give their child a leg up.
I mean, you kind of pausing over there, Megan-Brette, so I can do that. But I think that it becomes an ethical issue. So I don't think that it's wrong for a person to choose or to elect to do something differently than what they're doing. Like I learned French because I was moving to France. I learned Japanese a little bit because I was moving to Japan. So I made a choice to do this, to pick up another code or to try to pick up another code, right? If you are electing to do that, that's great, but you cannot then turn around and expect that the special education system is the system to do that. And what happens a lot of times is the students who speak a different dialect are being referred because they're not following the pattern that the teacher wants them to follow in the classroom. And then it becomes an issue of them being qualified for special education. So what we're doing is we're shifting their educational program. We're shifting potentially their trajectory at that point, because we're changing their educational access in order to, quote unquote, fix what is not broken. And
True.
That's problematic. And we're using a lot of times IDEA funds for that. So we're using, funding that is set aside for people who actually have some challenges to have. And then we're using that to support somebody who elected to have a service. I think that that's a very valid choice. If that's the parent's choice, that's the parent's choice. But that's not the setting or the place for that to happen. It should be happening in the classroom. Does it? I don't think so.
Yeah.
It should be. Go ahead.
Well, and I love how you said it, because I think I tell my students all the time, I'm like, if that was our job, right? If that was our job, first of all, I don't like the word speech language pathologist for that then, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't like it, to be honest, in general. But if that was our job, then we would, at this point in time in 2021, what would we be seeing? 70% of the school, 80% of the school? That's not our job. Right. It needs to be things like, so if the child has a diagnosed, communication disorder, communication challenge, then yes, you're on my caseload, whether you speak AAE, MAE, Chicano English, Tagalog English, doesn't matter what dialect you speak. If you have a communication disorder, you should be on my caseload. Got that. But if you speak AAE and your parents want you to speak MAE, or at least learn it, gather it as a tool, for something for the future, then I completely agree. It needs to be happening in the classroom. That's not our position. Right. Now, again, I think words matter. I do think if someone called me a communication specialist, right, and I did some kind of RTI type program, then I'd feel okay going to the classroom, talking about linguistic differences, talking about the different ways that people speak and all this kind of stuff. But that's not how it's set up.
Yeah,
that's not. And I know Dr. Noma Lawan, she's probably not even listening, but I love Dr. Lawan. She had a program years ago. Right? You can Google it. She had this program years ago. I don't know where it went, but it was teaching it in a way that, and there might be controversy over it, but she was teaching mainstream American English in a way where it was very meta. It was very meta-linguistic. They were understanding language in this other way, third person singular, right? First person, so all these things that we kind of take for granted when we learned how to diagram sentences years ago. But
the trauma.
It was a lot. It was a lot. And see, look at us. We're all like, it was too much. It's too much. But I think it needs to be happening a lot more if that's the case in the classroom. But I also don't think that we have equipped and prepared our teachers to do that.
Not at all.
So therein lies another issue. Like, I don't think we need to be seeing kids who just have, different dialect than mainstream, but then teachers aren't equipped or prepared or trained in that way at all.
And this relates back to the whole ebonics controversy too. This is what they were trying to do, was bridge the gap between the two dialects. And it turned into this whole other media storm of foolishness and lies, that they were trying to dumb down the education. But educators need to understand language. Everything that they do is language, but there is minimal language training in the educational programs, which is amazing, because every single thing that they do,
literacy,
language, or determining how someone else uses language.
I am fascinated, and I don't say it to be cruel. I say it to talk disparagingly about the system, but I'm like, how are they teaching reading and they don't understand language? How are they communicating effectively and they don't understand communication or I don't know. I think it's content driven, right? Behavioral driven. And that's a whole nother thing that's culturally embedded too, right? I don't know how many kids are probably labeled ADHD. In reality, they're, kind of just
following some other pragmatic rules
and showing engagement in a different way, showing engagement differently. I had one of my students said it. So they're just engaging with the material differently. I said, I like how you put that. Yeah. I mean, all those things,
We pathologize everything though.
Yes.
If you don't do it this way,
Mhm.
then it's wrong.
Right.
Yep. That whole
And
notion.
too often it's Black and brown who don't do it this way. But again, we're not looking at a pattern. We're saying, oh, there's something wrong with these communities, not with the way that we are structuring the school. And it's always, the onus has always shifted back to the students. So we have this quote unquote Black-white achievement gap, which is largely a political tool to position whiteness as my target in life. But I think that what we're doing is placing the onus because we're saying achievement. So achievement is the student's responsibility, right? We're not looking at the fact that we're not providing the education in a way that is attainable for everybody. Nobody's putting the onus on the school for the way that our systems are run. We're just saying that the kids are failing to do something. And then the fact that there is a white Asian gap makes it a whole nother thing, because I'm aiming for number 2 is amazing to me, because I don't know any activity in life where I aim to be number 2 if there's, this gap we're talking about. But cool.
In the blink of the eyes. You can't hear that, but you can see it on the YouTube. Just the hard, slow blink. Yes, that's true. Thank you. Which means I agree. So like you said, as we talk about the code and I'm blinking, or just how we engage with the material differently, or our children could engage with the material differently, let's talk a little bit more about the rules. We got into it a little bit. There's what's acceptable, and like you said, what would be, I don't even want to use the word standard, but yeah, let's talk about the rules. Let's talk about the rules of AAVE and what it is and what it is not. And then we're going to jump into this SNL skit.
It's not slang.
Oh boy. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, let's talk about that.
Let's not do that.
Well, so so here's what's crazy. And remind me to get back to the rules after this point I'm about to make. So I personally, I don't know about you, Dionna, I don't know why AAVE gets me. I don't like the vernacular part. I just don't like that part.
The root of that is not.
Yeah, it just feels like that makes it less already. It already makes
the root is not right. The root of that word is a little problematic anyway.
And I'm very well aware that a lot of people in the educational world say Black English and they don't like African American English. Yeah. I did have someone point out that they often call it the name of what we are called at this point in history. Mm-hmm. So it was called Negro dialect when they called us Negro. It was called Black English when they called us Black. It's called African American English when they say African American English, right? Dr. Washington, helped me think about this. And so all that to say is, I call African American English. That's kind of what our field calls it, right? But what it is, it's a rule-governed systematic way of speaking. That is the definition of a dialect. It's rule-governed, it's systematic, it's a way of speaking. There are rules to it. There is a lexicon to it. There are principles of pronunciation to it, just like any other dialect. So one thing I try and talk about is we oftentimes will describe the features of AAE with deficit language, right? So we'll say, oh, they dropped the S for plurals, right? So instead of saying there goes, 2 dogs, someone who speaks AAE may say, not always, because markers are different, but they might say, there go 2 dogs. So for me, that's one of my things in this world. Dionna knows this. I'm trying to get people to speak differently about the features, communicate differently about the features. It's not that they're dropping an S, they're marking plural differently. They mark plural by number.
But the S is redundant anyway.
The S is redundant anyway.
You said 2.
Right? I know you meant 2. I don't need to hear the S at the end, right? And I think people need to understand that in order to really respect the dialect, we need to talk about the features and the rules as to what they are doing. Because the second you say what they're not doing, you have set them in a comparison against something else. And anytime you set them against a comparison against the quote unquote standard, someone's going to fail.
That's true.
I tell people all the time, I'm not a non-male. I'm not a non-blonde. That doesn't even help understand who I am if I say I'm a non-blonde. That doesn't help understand at all what I am. You got to tell me what I am and use the words positively in a non-comparative way to really understand and appreciate and respect who I am. So as far as the AAE features go, we really need to do a better job of understanding what the features actually are. What are people doing, not what they're not doing.
Yeah, but that touches on the whole other, again, back to the pedagogy of code switching. When you're teaching someone to code switch, you're using words that are making one less than the other. So you're automatically positioning one as inferior. That's problematic. So I don't necessarily say I'm not pro code switching pedagogy, and I'm not really anti. I'm just kind of like, if that's what you're doing, do it, but do it well, do it effectively. And when you position these, when you make these false dichotomies of formal and informal, or home versus school, or any of those things, those are problematic, because if I'm saying that this is a home language, then I'm suggesting that it doesn't belong in an academic setting. So that's saying something about that language. But that's also saying something about who you are related to and who you are, engaging with at home. I'm saying something about all of them too, when I say that it's not academic, that it's not intelligent, that it doesn't belong in the academic setting or educational setting. So we don't think about all of the implications of what we're saying about when we're talking about how people use the language. And just like Megan-Brette said, the language we're using to frame the pattern becomes a problem.
That's true. I cut you off earlier. Sorry, I was doing a little double dutch. You said something and it made me think about formal versus informal. Instead of saying that, we should say what? Just speak of what it is, like you said, because I hear that a lot. This is formal, this is informal, which is like you're saying, it's that still.
That's not true, though. I mean, what does a pastor use? Yeah. Is the pastor informal if he speaks AAE? Because that's not an informal use of it.
Correct.
That would be more towards the end of the formal use of it.
And it still sets up a nasty, especially in kids that are savvy, it still sets up a nasty hierarchy comparison, because some people's home language is the school language. Mm-hmm. So how come she can use her home language here? But you're telling me I can't use my home language? Again, proxy. Yep. People think they're slick.
Yeah.
But I'm like,
that's all we're doing. Yeah.
All those words. Now I'm just like going back and rethinking my whole existence. Just right now in this moment. But again, it's problematic because when you think you're helping in any way, even from cute little social media posts, making jokes and things like that. I mean, I'm literally going back like, I just need to take a lot of things down, which is why I wanted to have this conversation, because I'm going through this in my mind. And I think it's important for us to talk about this so that we can change the narrative. And this is a way that we can be empowered and begin to move forward. We can stop doing this to us, because I wouldn't want to harm my brother or sister knowingly or unknowingly. So it's,
it's funny you're saying this too, because I was working on my dissertation, and I don't know if my dad will ever hear this, but he didn't fully get what I was talking about. Thank you. Of course you will. He didn't really get what I was talking about. And my dad is an AAE speaker, right? He's from Yemassee, South Carolina. And so is my mom. Now, they both went through the system, so they know mainstream American English, right? My dad got his PhD. My mom ran Montgomery County, Maryland libraries. They speak it. But when I really started to listen, I was like, oh, my parents both speak AAE, like a lot. Different markers than I was used to hearing, because I grew up in Maryland and they're from South Carolina. But when I approached it to my dad, and this is the problem with our community, when I approached it to my dad, he was like, no, I don't. I don't speak it. Now, I can put things into context very well. My dad's a baby boomer. He grew up in the South as a Black male who was told time and time again the way he spoke was wrong, right? My mom was too. They both had to go to like some speech classes before they went to college. My mom's from Charleston, so she's got Gullah speaking cousins. So that's a whole nother area. But to hear how my dad was so defensive about it. And I even tried, I was like, no, Dad, it's not bad. And that's another thing. I get in trouble because I love to hear the different ways people speak. And I realize, and I'm aware that some people think I'm either making fun of them or something. I was like, no, I love it. I don't want us all to sound the same. I would love it if we all just spoke the way that feels most natural and comfortable for us, whatever that is. But we have a problem in our community. Even when I talk to some of my girlfriends who I love, they kind of give me the side eye about what I'm doing with my research. Cause it's like, but you trying to not let Black kids, do well in school and be successful in society. I'm like, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying we need to stop pulling each other down, and realize that this is part of our culture.
But it's empowering to have it validated. So that's part of the issue that we're facing too, with this whole like systemic racism and all the fun that we're having right now in this country. But I think that the lack of validity that, denying it validity denies people their identity, which has been a theme. If you look at our history, that's for another day, but that has been a theme. So I think that when we look at this and say it is a thing, it's a a valid way of communicating, it's real, that gives you a little bit more sense of self, of ownership, of power. And that can right there be empowering for the student to go to school and to learn, because I have this thing that is mine, that is my family's, that is rich, that is part of my heritage. And I have a heritage, and this ties me back to my homeland. The roots of it are there. That's empowering. And so it's not to make someone not perform well in school. It's not to make someone fall behind. We're not saying, we don't want people to code switch, or we don't want people to learn other dialects. If they want to, that's great. I just personally, I'm a code switcher because I grew up in a home that code switched, but I don't feel that that's everyone's experience. And so for me to take that experience and say everybody must code switch, that's me forcing my lifestyle and my experiences onto another person. And that may not be their reality. And that's okay. That's valid that that's not your experience.
So you hit on something that I've tried to get people to understand too, especially our culture. So I can't remember who it is. It might be Ogbu, but there are people who have talked about Black culture as the invisible culture. So basically you can get people, there's this thing about bilingualism, right? Bilingualism, international people, global diversity, whatever that is, people understand that. People can wrap their heads around it. People can wrap their heads around a kid who's 5 years old who comes from a Spanish-speaking home, and they know what to do with them. They know how to assist when the literacy and assist in the homework and all this stuff, and they have some grace for them, right? I would love it if we could get to some place in our lives where a little Black kid comes to kindergarten, teacher says something, say, actually, I speak AAE at home, but, I'm willing to learn this one. Thanks for, they don't even know what they speak. They don't even have a name for what they speak. People say ghetto. Black people, we say ghetto, right? You speak ghetto, you speak improperly, you speak this, I wish I spoke, more educated or whatever. But we don't even have the words for it in our community, right? We had ebonics, but then that just, as, Dionna said, that just blew up in everybody's face. So that's become a joke. Right? People hear ebonics and it's become a joke. But I'm like, no, but it
was actually valid stuff.
But the system is real.
Anonymous ghetto, actually.
Yeah. I wish, I used to work with librarians, and hopefully I'll still work with librarians. And, I always try and find a way in. I'm like, who can I get to help us get in? And I'm like, okay, librarians, doing circle time, read books that are written in different language varieties. And before you start the book, you say, okay, this is a book. Here's the title. Let's see. What language variety is this in? Oh, Appalachian English. All right, let's read it. What language variety is this in?
But shouldn't we be doing that anyway? We have so much variation just within our country, but then of course in other areas as well, other English speaking countries have additional varieties. And so if we just respect the idea that people speak differently in different parts of the country and different parts of the world, why is that a bad thing? Why does it have to be something I need to fix or to repair? I think it's so important to do that anyway.
Yeah, it's the same issue with Southern dialects, right? So I'm growing up, I'm from Louisiana, and people say things like it's complimentary. Oh my gosh, you're from Louisiana? I didn't even know. I couldn't tell.
You're so articulate.
Yeah, you're so articulate.
Girl, don't even that articulate.
I'm laughing. Coded.
Yeah. You're so articulate. And I remember when I worked skilled nursing, this was probably my second year out of school, and I went in a patient's room and I did the evaluation and I walked out and I closed the curtain, but I wasn't even out of the room, but I heard it was a white family, white couple. And the wife said, she just speaks so articulately. She said it like she was just floored.
It's a surprise. Yeah. It's a surprise.
Yes. Why surprise? That's crazy.
Which is crazy. And again, someone, for me, I grew up speaking this way. And so it was always weird because I'm like, they'll say, well, you're different than the rest of them. I'm like, you do realize when you say rest of them, that is my cousins, my grandmother, my uncle, my grandfather, my parents. When you say the rest of them, I'm related to the rest of them. Right.
But there's also stuff that research that talks about the fact that when you don't speak a different dialect and you're speaking mainstream English, it's still expected that you're going to speak non-mainstream. And then the features that you do have that are not features of non-mainstream or of an AAE, for instance, they're still counted as such. So
that's true.
It doesn't matter.
You recount the story in your voice.
Yeah.
Oh, I love paralinguistics. I talk all the time. I say, for my dissertation, one of the things I wanted to ask was, because I worked in classrooms for 10 years and I watched the communication interaction between teachers and my Black kids. And I'm like, what's going on there?
Yeah.
And I remember, to get back to our very linguistic talk about morphosyntax, grammar and all that. I was like, I don't think teachers are reacting to the fact that the kid said, I ain't do my homework.
Mm-hmm.
I think they're reacting to the fact that the kid said, I ain't do my homework.
Mm-hmm.
And that is very key to AAE, right? Like you can say, she don't know nothing versus she don't know nothing.
Mm-hmm.
That paralinguistic piece, I don't think teachers, police officers realize they are reacting. They are reacting to that cadence, that tone, that register. That's part of AAE too.
Mm-hmm.
That's part of it, and so when teachers say, well, she had an attitude, I'm like, did she have an attitude? And maybe she did. Don't get me wrong. We know our Black kids, right? We were there. Maybe she did, but I'm like, I don't know if it was an attitude. I think you interpret it as that.
But even social media, you can post stuff. I posted something the other day and this lady jumped all over me being snippy or snooty or something. And I'm like, so you just you saw my little profile pic and decided this is my tone.
You put that together.
and this is how I'm coming off at you. And it's that's not how that is. And it's funny because I'm like, you don't even have a tone when I write something. And so for you to assume then assign this tone to me as I'm talking to you is amazing. And I didn't touch it. I didn't go there because I was like, that's a whole nother.
I know. Let me just go and
I've
gotten in trouble with some of my students who I love. I love you students if anyone's listening to this, but I've gotten in trouble with some students because I might say something, maybe I code switch and I said it in a way and they have interpreted very negatively. And I'm like, well, there you go. And there's a lovely microaggression professional hazard.
So many things. We have a couple things, comments, and a question from the audience. Thank you, RNTV Multimedia, for tuning in from Ghana. And we have Karen Davis from Nashville, and she's in the audience and agreeing. But his question is, why is Black culture being undermined? That's loaded. Man, that's a different...
Well, I want to say this, though, about that, because that is a very good question. But I think what's going on, honestly, is to separate the value of it. Because when it becomes a commodity, when they're selling it in our music, when they're selling it in a movie, when it's all gritty and amazing and, ooh, look at this, it's authentic and it sounds urban or whatever. I mean, at that point, they're selling it and they're making something off of it. It's valuable. It's valid. But if I sit here and say something to you and it's horrible, it's ignorant, it's dumb, it's less than, so it really depends on who has the control of it. And I don't know that Black culture is being undermined. I think that Black culture is being pimped. And that's really what we do in this country.
And you have to differentiate. I love how you said that, Dionna. You also have to differentiate. There's a t-shirt out there on Facebook that says something like it. They want our rhythm, but not our blues.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yes. Like, I don't think Black culture is being undermined. I think Black people are.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I really do. Like, I remember I was watching some episode of a white show. I can't remember what it was, Modern Family or something. And the name of the episode, it was written AAE. And I was like, hot damn, they keep doing it. Yeah. And it's okay.
The commercials. It's okay. I mean, commercials, you see all of it. And
you're like, cool. You're cool. I mean, it's the same thing with the cornrows and Bo Derek and all of that from years ago. It's cool. It's exotic. It's different. But the second it belongs to you,
then it's
a whole nother story. Yeah,
it's unprofessional.
It's all good. Whenever I hear that, I'm still taken aback. Did you just say it's all good?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they did. They did. And that goes to that whole SNL situation too. Yeah. Like taking it and then repackaging it as your own, and you can tell when it's not authentically being used, when it's not accurate. I mean, you can tell when a speaker is putting on airs or trying to do something. Yeah. They fail every time at the paralinguistics of it.
Yep.
There's
you can tell.
It tells on them immediately.
Immediately, because like you said, there are rules to this. don't play with us with this.
Yeah, but even semantically.
Yes.
Because sometimes the context that you're using that doesn't, no, don't do that. That doesn't go there, you know, because you don't understand the full meaning of it. And so therefore, when you apply it, it's all out of place. Don't do that.
It's very much out of place. You made me go look at that skit. I didn't watch Saturday Night Live, but I was like, oh, but they were making it like it was a Gen Z thing.
Yeah.
They didn't even try to, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. What are your, so I was talking about this earlier. I think, so I watched the skit, and then I read an article about, Michael Che and what went down, and how he didn't know what AAE is. Of course, they call it AAVE. And he had to go find out. So, of course, I'm like, I'm so happy you're doing this, because I hope our Black community is listening. I'm like, guys, really, it's actually a real thing.
Yeah.
Please look it up.
But
the thing that kind of frustrated me, and I was like, I'm not going to do it because I'm not like a Twitter person or whatever. But I'm like, first of all, most of it, in my opinion, and you correct me if I'm wrong, most of it was slang. Okay. And slang trends. And slang is, I'm not a linguist, so I guess you can put slang under dialect in the vocabulary section. And I do think that there are slang terms that fit with a certain community of speakers, right? Like I was talking to my friend today, she's white, and we were saying like white people, totes, adorbs. That's slang. And it's
and every dialect has that though.
And
so every dialect has slang.
That. And so what I realized, I was like, well, first of all, I don't think everyone really, everyone who's fighting for the AAE, I'm like, I don't know. But I think it definitely felt like, because I didn't hear grammatical features. I didn't hear morphosyntactic features. I didn't hear grammatical features. I didn't hear, it felt like it was just the slang. And I thought that perhaps he was making fun of the people who don't know how to use the slang correctly. I don't know. I mean, there's so many different interpretations of it, but I was like, first of all, get it right, people. It was definitely, and again, I didn't pay attention, but I don't feel like I heard grammatical, phonological, any kind of those.
I think it was very brief.
Dialect.
If there was anything in there that was grammatical, it was very brief. I think there were not very many sentences. But I think part of the issue also, though, if you look at our dialect semantically, we create words, we coin new words. And so a lot of what we're doing, like the examples you gave of, like totes or adorbs, those are breaking down a word that exists. Right. Whereas we come out with something that is just a new thing, like the whole on fleek situation, that's just a new word. We're bringing this
bumping. I said you're going to enjoy it. Podcast. I was like bumping from the 1980s.
But like we bring a word that didn't exist before in a lot of cases, or a phrase or something like that. And I think that piece of it and that ingenuity is something that is unique to our culture, and that we create these things. And typically it's propagated in the music or in, some sort of media. But now with it being in social media, it gets colonized very quickly, and then people are running off with it. And so I think that's where the conflict, kind of came up there, and the miscommunication came up there.
Right.
It's being assigned to a whole group of people, and all of those people did not.
And I don't even know who, I'm about to sound real ignorant. Who is Gen Z? How old are they right now? I don't even know. Is Gen Z after the millennials? I'm so lost.
Yeah. Wait, what is it? Millennials, general, Gen X, what's Gen X? I don't know.
Yeah, I know what I
am. I'm learning. So yeah. So what about that? When we talk about things like conversate, for instance.
It's your word. It's your buzzword.
You did not like it. Wait, could we ask you a question, Shuli?
Sure.
So when you had previously, what was your issue with conversate? What was, I guess, the thing that kind of grinded you about the word?
It was just that it wasn't a word, and I learned that, and to hear people using it, I guess like it was a word. It was just like, it's just not a word. I would just say it's fine. It's just not a word. You can say it if you want to, but then
if the right person tried to conversate with you, was you going to shut them down or what?
Well, conversation is not always a deal breaker, depending on who uses the word when they're stepping into me.
Okay, so that's what I was wondering.
Context matters. That's my story of my life.
No, it really does matter. But yeah, it was just that it was not a word. But then, of course, irregardless, one of those words also. But then I can't even say that was just a Black word. Like I've heard people say irregardless.
I have a white friend who says it all the time.
But it's actually adopted now into the
Well,
dictionary.
here's
So
what I find
shut y'all
interesting about
down.
words, though, right? And this is where I come again with communication. What I find interesting about words, they're relative, and words are words. And for me, the primary goal and what I prioritize is communication, effective communication. If you understood what I meant,
Mm-hmm.
why does it matter how you said it versus I said it, or how I say it versus you say it? Did you understand? Now, if you didn't understand, that's a whole nother thing. Then we kind of go a little bit more words, add more words, do something, give an example, draw a picture, do something.
Do a dance.
Something, I don't know. But I just feel like, and I used to be that way. And the reason I say all this, because I used to be like that too, right? I remember my SLP days and many SLP fails, right? I remember, and I was like, dang. And now that, I'm older and wiser and personal and professional growth. And I also, I forget to say this disclaimer at the beginning. I always say, like, for today, May 13th, 2021, these are my opinions. This is how I feel. But as I get older with my personal and professional growth, I may not agree with what I said on this day, right? So I just need everybody to understand that.
Yeah, it's a process. We're growing through it.
Because we grow, right? And we learn more and we live more. But I do think that communication should be prioritized. I think the way people pronounce things, you pronounce it differently. Did you get it? Did you understand what I said? I understood what you said, right? I think the idea and the definition of words is very relative. Like, it's not a word. I'm like, well, what does that mean? It's not a word. Did you understand what he said? I don't know. I think, I don't know.
I want to look back, though. Yeah, communication is the goal, but I want to look back at some of the assumptions and the myths about it. Like, you can't be gainfully employed if you speak AAE, or you can't, do all of these different things. But I think the problem isn't that you can't do those things. It's that these everyday jobs that people hold, that where they do speak AAE, they're not up in front of us. There's no example of that. Like, no one's putting a random teacher who speaks AAE up on the stage for us to all look at, So I think there aren't examples because we don't have examples of any of that. We don't have examples of a person who speaks Southern American English doing it, And I know that a lot of the examples we uphold are these like media figures, like Steve Harvey, AAE all day, and has no intention of changing. Like, I've even seen episodes where he goes back and forth with educators about it.
Our athletes are interesting.
Yeah.
Our athletes are very interesting because I know what they are being told.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But that's what I love about it. The paralinguistics will always come out.
Yeah.
But I can hear the grammar and the morpho syntax trying to change.
Yeah, trying to be okay.
I hear what you try to do.
No, what gets me is when I'm presenting to a group of people and I have someone who is an AAE speaker, like, complain about the fact that I'm saying it's valid. Like, you're speaking to me in AAE to negate the fact that I'm saying that this is valid. Like, that always just blows my mind, because I'm like,
that just says so much about,
I don't even know where to start. Yeah, but I don't even know how do you address that? Like,
I know
it's the right and wrong in how we move up in society. It's our language is a big thing, because the reality is, in corporate America, they do assessments. They do yearly assessments, and they look at communication. Things are being said about how people speak. And so if everything in your world has taught you that the way that you speak is wrong, like you said, it's your identity. It's an attack on your identity, really, but you're not really seeing it as such. So if I continue to improve myself, if I improve my communication skills, if I'm constantly having to work, but the reality is that bar always moves. Like, for instance, before entry level was a high school diploma, then it became a bachelor's degree, then it was a master's degree, and now it's just like it continues. The bar continues to move. We continue to do the work because, one, I just feel like we're resilient as a culture, right? We're going to do what we need to do. We adapt. Historically, that's where it came from. Now, talk about that really quickly. Let's talk about the history of it. I'm sorry, I'm going down my own rabbit hole. Let me. I got y'all. Talk about the history of it and our adaptability as it relates to language. And where did this come from? Historical background.
We're awesome. It came from we're awesome.
I mean, okay, wait,
awesome and resilient.
I want to talk about when we're done. I want to talk about the definition of success too, and what that looks like. That's a key point here.
Well, but maybe you need to hit that first, so before we even
I'll
get
hit
into
it first.
that.
Then we'll do history, because what you were saying, I think sometimes what we do, and I know I'm going to get a lot of flack from this. Not everyone agrees with me, but not everybody's going to college. Not everybody should go to college. That's just true.
Yeah.
People's definition of success is different. I think we all have this idea that we're supposed to be making 6 figures, have a college degree, live in a house in this certain neighborhood, and that means I made it, and that's success. And that's not necessarily true for everyone. Yeah. And so, Dionna, I talked about earlier about, the whole, like you said, at a job in America, you have to speak this way, whatever. I'm like, well, it depends. What kind of job do you want? What job is makes passionate, is passionate for you? It may not necessarily be that you need to use these different tools that, a teacher might give you. I do think that we have this idea that everyone wants the same thing.
Yeah.
And that's not necessarily true.
Not at all. And it's not always the requirement.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think in terms of that, and that's what I was saying, kind of set that up a little bit, but in terms of success, survival, historically for us in this country is success, just given all of the things that we have to overcome. And I'm not suggesting that survival should be the bare minimum by any means, but there was so much stacked on us and heaped on us that getting through and still having a sense of the identity and the tenacity and, just the strength of our ancestors, that's valid, that's important. And that's something that I identify with, that I want to hold on to. That's a part of me. It's an important part of me that, you try to break all of us, and if you think about just moving, so looking at the roots of it coming from West African nations where, we were kidnapped and all of that good stuff and brought across, you had to think about who survived this trip. Think about who survived the oppression and the capture over there. Think about who survived this Middle Passage. Think about who survived this torture and servitude and all this stuff that was forced upon us. Those people were not weak. Those people were not weak-minded. Those people were not, you had to have strength. You had to be really, really tough to get through all of that. So we don't come from some weak, less than stock. That's not who we come from. We come from a powerful nations, okay? Because there's no way you can do all of those things to people and they still survive and they still thrive and you still want what we got.
Yeah, you do. You want our rhythm, but not our blues.
You want it. So there's no way I should be ashamed of that in any way. There's no aspect of that I should be ashamed of. But you want to talk a little bit about the history?
Yeah, that's the trickery, to be ashamed of that and to ashamed
it worked.
Yeah, to walk away from it.
Like that's what gets to me. I think when I talk to Black people about this, and I hear them again, even my friends from Hampton, right? HBCU. What do you study? What? That's not real. What? I'm like, why? And they know what it is. Do you know what I mean? Again, they know what it is because we all know what it is. But the fact that I had a name to it and I research it and I study it and I promote it, they're like, but that's why would you do that? I'm like, it worked. It worked. Wow, way to go, America! You did it. You made us ashamed of who we are.
No.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
I'm not buying into that.
Okay. Aquila Johnson says, I would refuse to read in school because my cousins couldn't pronounce simple words and I felt like I shouldn't read due to peer pressure. I didn't want my cousins to know that I actually knew how to read. I would rather go to detention than to read in front of my cousins.
Wow.
Oh, sheesh. Yeah. That schooling thing, that educational institution.
Yeah. That's a whole nother episode, I think.
Gosh, I was like,
right
I know. It needs.
That's a whole nother episode of what we're being taught.
Where it's like, it's working exactly the way it's supposed to.
Yeah, it is.
That is true. That is true. We learned this last year. That was one of the realizations, like, oh my gosh, that is so very true. Why would you change what has been working for you for years? It's not broken. It's doing what's designed to do.
To maintain a low wage working class.
Oh my God. Yeah. To capitalism.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, that's just me.
That's a whole nother.
Yes, ma'am. Phyllis said, awesome conversation and great info. Thank you, ladies.
Yes, thank you.
how can they find you all? Because this conversation definitely needs to continue. I know Megan-Brette, you have your podcast and you talk about such things that would be helpful. How can
so I have my podcast, Honeybee Connection, podcast by MB, which you can find on almost any place you do podcasts. And my website, www.megan-brette-hamilton.com. I've got resources on there about AAE. You can download them to learn a little bit more about it, and just the features. Some people are always curious about the features, and I'm trying to write them in positive ways so that we can start talking about it in that way. But that's me.
Yeah.
Out here reframing the conversation. Thank you so much for that. And Dionna, Dr. Dionna Latimer-Hearn.
So you can come find me if you're interested in this topic in particular. Come find me at Respect the Dialect Facebook group. You can go to respectthedialect.com, which is being built up, so don't judge me yet. But you can link from there to the Facebook group, and then also my website is listed right there beneath my image. You can go there as well to learn some other things about me. I also have a nonprofit organization, but all of that can be accessed from the dlhearn.net website.
Okay. And before we get out of here, tell us one nugget that we can just, I don't even want us to put it in our pockets, something that we can take with us from this call as we're reframing and respecting the dialect. What can we do moving forward to move this conversation forward and to just do better and be better?
And they were like,
I'm gonna say, and I don't want to offend anyone or anything like that, but a lot of times what happens is the ignorance, this idea that this is ignorant, is assigned to the speaker of the dialect. And I would challenge you to really examine the person who holds that view, the ignorance that they have about language and about linguistics. So really revisit what you understand about language. This has been studied for decades. It is an actual thing. This dialect is actually the most studied dialect. There's so much out there on it. So really, embrace that and go and explore it before you make that decision, before you accept this narrative that's been handed to us.
And I would say, I kind of got two. I went last. The first one that came to my mind was
gotta be better.
I am worth that. The way we speak is a strong part of our identity, regardless of how you speak. If you're Black, you speak MAE. You Black, you speak AAE. You white, you speak. It is a part of our identity. It's a cultural piece. It's not just something flippant to be like, oh, just code switch. Oh, just change the way you speak. Oh, say that word differently. You are impacting someone's cultural linguistic identity when you do that. And then the last thing I just wanted to say was communication is dynamic. When you have an interaction with someone and it's not going well, it's because it's about both of y'all. Yeah. I think we put the burden on the person who is furthest away from mainstream expectations of the privileged way to speak. This could be AAE, this could be stuttering. And people put the burden on that person. Communication is dynamic, and for it to work, everybody's got to put the work in. Everybody's got to do the work.
That's good stuff. And I like to end with ASHA, which is the West African word. We have the power to create with our words and take this conversation, create something good, create something beautiful. Let's change the narrative and move forward and take this, share it with someone. You can catch the replay or share it on our YouTube channel. Let's see, what else do I have to say? I think that's really about it. Besides, thank you so much, ladies. This was a good conversation. Happy Better Hearing and Speech Month. You're very welcome. So again, go out and speak it. Have a good night.